Is that why you didn't get caught up in what transpired in the 90s, which is known as the steroid era?
My dad was always saying, hey, you're not going to be the biggest. You're not going to be the strongest. You're not going to be the fastest. Just don't let nobody outwork you.
6 names. 6 people Ken Griffey Jr. absolutely hates. On Club Shay Shay, Jr. sat down and named them all. These were not just rivals or opponents. These were people who made him sick. People who betrayed him. People who ruined the game he loved. Let me walk you through every single one and show you why Jr. could never forgive them. Ken Griffey Jr. was one of the cleanest superstars baseball ever had. He played during the worst era of cheating and scandal. While other players shot up steroids and chased money, Jr. stayed pure. He played for love. He played for family. He played the right way, but that meant watching bad people succeed. It meant seeing liars get rich. It meant feeling pain from childhood all the way through his career. The 6 people on his list represent everything Jr. stood against. They are his moral enemies. They are the villains in his story, and this is why he hates every single one of them. Understanding Jr.'s hate list means understanding who he was as a person. He was not someone who held grudges for no reason. He was not petty. He was not mean-spirited, but he had a code. He had values, and when people violated those values, he remembered. He kept score, and he never let it go. That is what makes this list so powerful. These are not casual dislikes. These are deep wounds. These are moral offenses. These are betrayals that cut to his core. The first 2 names belong together. They are George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin. Both were part of the New York Yankees. Both hurt Jr. when he was just a kid. Both created a grudge that lasted 30 years. This is where the hate began. This is where a 13-year-old boy learned that baseball could be cruel. The year was 1983. Jr. was only 13 years old. His dad, Ken Griffey Sr., played for the Yankees. Jr. would visit his father at the stadium before games. Other players brought their kids too. It was normal. Kids would run around the field. They would take ground balls. They would hang out in the dugout. For Jr., it was magical. He got to see his dad work. He got to be around professional baseball players. He got to dream about his own future in the game. He was living every kid's fantasy. But one day, everything changed for Jr. A security guard walked up to Griffey Sr. in the dugout. He delivered a message. The message came straight from George Steinbrenner. Steinbrenner did not want anyone in the dugout. That meant Jr. had to leave, right now. No exceptions. Griffey Sr. told his son to go, but before Jr. walked away, his dad pointed toward third base. Jr. looked over. There was Greg Nettles' son. He was taking ground balls on the field. He was playing freely. Nobody told him to leave. Nobody kicked him out. Jr. was stunned. Why could that kid stay but not him? Why was he the only one getting kicked out? It felt like discrimination. It felt like the Yankees thought his family was not good enough. It felt like pure disrespect. And it came from the top. George Steinbrenner made that rule. Steinbrenner was the owner. He controlled everything. He was known as the boss. He ran the Yankees like a dictator. He fired managers constantly. He demanded perfection. He ruled through fear and intimidation. And on that day, he humiliated a 13-year-old kid who just wanted to watch his dad play baseball. Think about what that does to a child. Jr. looked up to his father. He dreamed of playing in the big leagues someday, and the Yankees made him feel unwanted. They made him feel small. They made him feel like he did not belong. That kind of pain does not go away. It stays with you. It shapes how you see the world. And for Jr., it shaped how he saw the Yankees forever. Jr. never forgot that moment. It burned into his memory. It shaped how he saw the Yankees forever. Steinbrenner became the symbol of everything wrong with the organization. Arrogance, unfairness, cruelty. The Yankees acted like they were better than everyone else. They acted like they owned baseball. They acted like rules only applied to other people. And Jr. saw through all of it. He saw the ugliness beneath the pinstripes. He saw the darkness behind the success, and he wanted nothing to do with it. Jr. carried that pain into his professional career, and when he became a star, he made the Yankees pay for it, over and over again. Every time he stepped into Yankee Stadium, he remembered that day. He remembered being kicked out. He remembered watching another kid play while he was forced to leave, and it fueled him. It gave him power. It made him unstoppable. Throughout his career, the Yankees tried to sign Jr. They offered him big contracts. They promised him championships. They told him he could be the face of the franchise. But Jr. always said no, every single time. He would never wear the pinstripes. He would never play for the organization that humiliated him. Money could not change his mind. Glory could not change his mind. Nothing could change his mind. The wound was too deep. Billy Martin was the second Yankee on the hate list. Martin was the manager. He was the enforcer. He was the guy who created the toxic environment that allowed Jr. to get kicked out. Martin had a history of hating kids in the clubhouse. He thought they were loud and annoying. He wanted them gone. When Jr. was only 11 years old, Martin sent someone to tell Griffey Sr. to keep his kids quiet. It was another act of aggression, another moment of disrespect. Billy Martin was a legendary player and manager, but he was also a mean drunk. He got into bar fights. He cursed out umpires. He punched his own players. He created chaos wherever he went. And when he managed the Yankees, he brought that toxic energy into the clubhouse. Kids were not welcome in Billy Martin's world. They disrupted his control. control. They reminded him that baseball was supposed to be fun, and Billy Martin did not believe in fun. He believed in winning at any cost. Together, Steinbrenner and Martin formed the foundation of Junior's hatred for the Yankees. Steinbrenner made the policy. Martin enforced it. Both treated the Griffey family like they were beneath them. Both created an environment of hostility and shame. Junior took it personally. He took it deeply, and he held that grudge for 3 decades. That grudge became fuel. In 1995, Junior faced the Yankees in the playoffs. It was the American League Division Series. The Yankees were favored to win. They had a powerful lineup. They had great pitching. They had all the advantages. But they did not have what Junior had. They did not have his motivation. They did not have his anger. They did not have his need for revenge. Junior destroyed them. He hit 5 home runs in the series. 5 home runs in 5 games. It was legendary. He carried the Mariners to victory. He drove in the winning run in Game 5. The Kingdom went crazy. Fans screamed until their voices were gone. And Junior rounded the bases with the biggest smile on his face. It was the ultimate revenge. He used his talent to embarrass the organization that embarrassed him as a child. He showed them that the kid they kicked out of the dugout had become the best player in baseball. He showed them that their cruelty had created their worst nightmare. A player who would never forget, a player who would never forgive. And when reporters asked him years later about his favorite memory at Yankee Stadium, he said it simply: leaving Yankee Stadium. That was his favorite memory, walking out, because he hated everything the place represented. The arrogance, the entitlement, the cruelty. It all came flooding back every time he was there. And the only good feeling he ever had in that building was the feeling of leaving it behind. People always wondered why Junior never signed with the Yankees. Sports writers called it a mystery. Analysts tried to figure it out, but it was never a mystery to Junior. It was simple. They disrespected him as a child, and he never forgot. That is the power of treating people badly. It comes back to haunt you. Steinbrenner could have had the greatest player of a generation, but his arrogance cost him. His cruelty cost him. And Junior made sure he paid the price on the biggest stage. The third name on the list is Alex Rodriguez, A-Rod. This one hurts in a different way. This was not childhood trauma. This was adult betrayal. This was watching someone you trusted become everything you despised. This was learning that even the people closest to you could sell out. Junior and A-Rod were supposed to be brothers. They were both #1 draft picks for the Seattle Mariners. Junior was drafted in 1987. A-Rod came in 1993. They were the future of the franchise. 2 generational talents playing together. They were going to build a dynasty. They were going to win championships. They had a bond. A-Rod looked up to Junior. Junior mentored him. They hung out together. They trained together. They talked about bringing a World Series to Seattle. Everything seemed perfect. Junior taught A-Rod how to handle fame. He showed him how to deal with media. He gave him advice on staying focused. He treated him like a little brother, and A-Rod soaked it all up. He learned from the best. He watched how Junior carried himself, how Junior never let success change him, how Junior always put the team first. It seemed like A-Rod was learning the right lessons. It seemed like he would follow in Junior's footsteps, but it was all fake. But then the money came, and everything fell apart. At the turn of the millennium, both players left Seattle. Junior went to the Cincinnati Reds. He said he left for family. His parents lived in Cincinnati. His kids needed stability. He wanted to be close to home. And here is the important part. Junior took less money to make it happen. He signed a deal worth $116 million over 9 years, but he could have made tens of millions more elsewhere. He left money on the table. He chose family over greed. He chose values over wealth. He chose what mattered over what paid. A-Rod did the opposite. He signed with the Texas Rangers for $252 million over 10 years. It was the biggest contract in baseball history at the time. It was pure greed. A-Rod chased the money. He chased fame. He chased status. He abandoned Seattle for a payday, and Junior saw it as betrayal. The contrast between them was brutal. Junior represented baseball at its best. He played for love. He played for family. He played with integrity. He took less money to stay true to his values. He walked away from fortune to be close to his parents. He showed the world that some things matter more than cash. A-Rod represented the era of douchery and money grabs. He played for himself. He played for cash. He played for attention. He took the biggest contract in history and left the city that loved him. He showed the world that nothing mattered more than his bank account. Fans in Seattle noticed the difference immediately. They respected Junior for his values. They understood why he left. They wished him well. But A-Rod? They hated A-Rod. They booed him every time he came back to town. They made signs calling him a traitor. They threw things at him. They screamed insults. The anger was real. The betrayal was deep, and Junior watched all of it happen. Junior felt vindicated in 2001. By then, A-Rod had become the most hated man in Seattle. Fans booed him every time he came back to town. Junior said he was relieved. He was no longer the most hated man. A-Rod had taken that title, and Junior felt like the truth was finally out. Everyone could see that A-Rod was the sellout. Everyone could see that Junior was honest. A-Rod's greed had exposed him as a fraud. The money grab had revealed his true character, and Seattle fans knew the difference between someone who left for family and someone who left for greed. But it got worse. Years later, A-Rod became involved in the steroid scandal. He admitted to using performance-enhancing drugs. He lied about it for years. He denied everything. He blamed others. He played the victim. And then the truth came out. He had been cheating the whole time. He cheated the game. He cheated his teammates. He cheated the fans. And for Junior, it was the final proof. A-Rod's pursuit of money and fame came with a total lack of integrity. He sold out in every way possible. possible. He became everything Junior hated about modern baseball. Junior must have felt so much satisfaction watching A-Rod's downfall. All those years of people questioning Junior's decision to take less money. All those years of analysts saying A-Rod made the smart choice. All those years of watching A-Rod get praised for his numbers. And then the truth came out. The numbers were fake. The success was chemical. The legacy was contaminated. Junior had been right all along. Taking less money to maintain your integrity was the smart choice. Staying clean while others juiced was the right choice. Choosing values over fame was the only choice. And A-Rod proved it by destroying his own reputation through greed and cheating. The fourth and fifth names are Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa. These two are grouped together because they represent the same thing: steroids, cheating, the destruction of competitive purity. Junior hated them for contaminating the game he loved. In the 1990s, Junior competed in the great home run race. He was chasing the all-time home run record. So were Bonds and Sosa. It was supposed to be a fair competition, the best players in the world battling for greatness. Fans watched every game. Sports shows tracked every home run. It was the most exciting time in baseball, but it was not fair because Bonds and Sosa were juicing. Junior stayed clean. He never used steroids. He never cheated. He played the game the right way, and because of that, he fell behind. Bonds hit 762 career home runs. Sosa hit 609. Junior hit 630. But Junior's numbers were real. Bonds and Sosa were frauds. Their records meant nothing. Their achievements were fake. Their legacies were contaminated. The hatred for Bonds runs especially deep. There is a story that Bonds visited Junior's house in Orlando. During that visit, Bonds allegedly told Junior he was about to start using steroids. He told him directly, face to face. Junior was shocked. He was disgusted, but he said nothing. He chose to stay silent. That silence was his protest. He refused to join the cheating. He refused to compromise his values, and he refused to speak out because of the unwritten code among players. Imagine being in that position. Your rival comes to your house. He looks you in the eye, and he tells you he is about to cheat. He tells you he is about to gain an unfair advantage. He tells you he is about to destroy the integrity of the competition. What do you do? Junior could have exposed him. He could have told the media. He could have blown the whistle, but he did not. Because there is a code. Players do not snitch on other players, even when those players are about to ruin the game. But inside, Junior was furious. He was competing on an uneven playing field. He was losing records to chemically enhanced rivals. He was watching the game get destroyed by greed and fraud. And Bonds was at the center of it all. Bonds was the most talented player of his generation, but he was also the most corrupt. He chose to cheat even though he was already great. He chose to destroy the integrity of the sport for personal glory, and Junior never forgave him for that. Bonds did not need steroids. He was already a Hall of Fame player before he started juicing. He already had multiple MVP awards. He was already considered one of the greatest players ever, but it was not enough for him. He wanted more. He wanted the home run record. He wanted to be remembered as the best ever, and he was willing to cheat to get there. That is what Junior hated most. The greed, the lack of respect for the game, the willingness to destroy something beautiful just for personal glory. Sammy Sosa was just as bad. Sosa's body transformation was cartoonish. He went from a lean player to a muscle-bound giant. It was obvious he was using something. Anyone with eyes could see it. His head got bigger, his muscles bulged, his power numbers exploded, and baseball did nothing about it. They let it happen. They encouraged it. Because home runs sold tickets. Steroids were good for business. And Sosa was hitting home runs like crazy. And then came the corked bat scandal. Sosa got caught using an illegal bat. It was another layer of cheating. Another sign that he had no respect for the rules. He tried to claim it was an accident. He said he used that bat for batting practice, but nobody believed him. He was a cheater, plain and simple. And the corked bat just confirmed what everyone already knew. Junior saw Bonds and Sosa as the collective shame of the steroid era. They degraded the sport. They made a mockery of the home run record. They turned competition into a chemical arms race. And Junior wanted no part of it. His hatred for them was rooted in ethics. It was rooted in disgust. It was rooted in the pain of watching cheaters win while he stayed clean. Every home run Bonds hit felt like a theft. Every record Sosa broke felt like a lie. And Junior had to watch it all happen. He had to smile for the cameras. He had to answer questions about the home run race. He had to pretend like it was all fair competition. But deep down, he knew the truth, and it ate at him. When Junior was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he got in with 99.3% of the vote. It was one of the highest percentages ever. Meanwhile, Bonds and Sosa faced massive resistance. Many voters refused to vote for them because of steroids. The contrast was clear. Junior was celebrated as a clean legend. Bonds and Sosa were punished for their fraud. And for Junior, that was justice. The voters got it right. They understood the difference between real greatness and chemical greatness. They understood that Junior's 630 home runs meant more than Bonds' 762, because Junior's home runs were honest. The sixth and final name is Albert Belle. This one is different. Belle was not a cheater. He was not a greedy sellout. He was not an institutional enemy. Belle was just dangerous. He was volatile. He was aggressive, and he made Junior's life hell on the field. Albert Belle had one of the worst reputations in baseball. He was known for his explosive temper. He fought with opponents. He fought with teammates. He fought with reporters. One time he threw a baseball at a fan. Another time he destroyed a clubhouse. He was constantly on the edge of violence. He was a ticking time bomb. And when the Mariners played against him, Junior had to deal with that that chaos constantly. There was an incident where Belle threw a pitch that nearly hit Junior. Junior was visibly upset. He knew Belle was reckless. He knew Belle played with anger and no control. It was not about competition. It was about danger. Belle's aggression put other players at risk, and Junior hated having to navigate that volatility. Every at-bat against Belle's team felt dangerous. Every game felt like it could explode into violence. That is not how baseball should be played, but Junior got his revenge. On May 5th, 1996, Belle hit a ball deep to center field. It looked like a home run. Everyone in the stadium thought it was gone. Belle started his home run trot. The crowd started cheering, but Junior had other plans. He timed his leap perfectly. He jumped at the wall in the kingdom. He reached over the fence, and he robbed Belle of the home run. It was one of the greatest catches in baseball history, and it was poetic justice. That moment defined their rivalry. Belle represented raw power and chaos. Junior represented grace and discipline. Belle played with rage. Junior played with joy. And in that moment, Junior showed that elegance could defeat aggression. Talent could defeat anger. Purity could defeat chaos. It was not just a great catch. It was a statement. It said that Junior's way of playing was better. It said that skill and grace would always beat rage and power. Junior's hatred for Belle was rooted in professional opposition. Belle was everything Junior was not. He was unstable. He was dangerous. He was toxic. And Junior wanted to neutralize him. Every time they faced each other, it was a battle of temperaments. And Junior won. Not just with that catch, but with his entire approach to the game. Junior loved baseball. Belle seemed to hate it. Junior smiled and laughed. Belle scowled and cursed. Junior made the game look easy. Belle made it look violent. And fans could see the difference. These 6 names tell a story. They tell the story of Ken Griffey Jr.'s values. They tell the story of his pain. They tell the story of his integrity. And when you look at them all together, you see something important. You see a man who refused to compromise. Steinbrenner and Martin hurt him as a child. They humiliated him. They created institutional cruelty. And Junior never forgot. He turned that pain into power. He used it to dominate the Yankees for years. He made them pay every chance he got. A-Rod betrayed him as an adult. He chose money over loyalty. He chose greed over integrity. And Junior saw it as a moral failure. He watched A-Rod become everything he despised. And when the steroid scandal broke, Junior knew he had been right all along. Bonds and Sosa contaminated the game. They cheated. They lied. They destroyed competitive purity. And Junior stayed clean as a silent protest. He competed against cheaters and refused to become one. That took incredible strength. Belle represented chaos. He played with anger and recklessness. And Junior defeated him with grace. He showed the world that talent beats rage every time. Each name on this list represents a violation of Junior's values. Each one stands for something he refused to become. Steinbrenner and Martin were arrogant and cruel. Junior was humble and kind. A-Rod was greedy and disloyal. Junior was principled and true. Bonds and Sosa were frauds and cheaters. Junior was honest and clean. Belle was volatile and dangerous. Junior was joyful and safe. Junior played for family. He played for love. He played clean. He played with joy. He never sold out. He never cheated. He never folded to baseball's dark side. And his hate list became a kind of moral compass. It showed the world what he stood against. It showed the world what he refused to accept. It showed the world who he really was. Think about how rare that is. Most people compromise. Most people give in. Most people take the easy path. But not Junior. He had chances to join the Yankees and make millions. He said no. He had chances to use steroids and break records. He said no. He had chances to chase money over family. He said no. Every time the world offered him a shortcut, he refused. Every time someone asked him to compromise his values, he walked away. That is why his legacy matters. That is why people still talk about him with reverence. That is why he got 99.3% of the Hall of Fame vote. Because he represented something pure in a dirty era. Because he stood for integrity when everyone else was selling out. Because he never blinked. Looking back at Junior's career now, we can see the full picture. We can see how special he really was. Not just because of his talent. Not just because of his smile. Not just because of his backward hat. But because of his character. Because of his values. Because of his refusal to compromise. He played in the steroid era and stayed clean. He could have made more money but chose family. He could have played for the Yankees but held his grudge. He could have been friends with cheaters but kept his distance. Every decision he made was guided by his moral code. Every choice reflected his values. Every action showed the world who he truly was. And that is why this hate list matters so much. It is not about being bitter. It is not about holding grudges. It is about standing for something. It is about drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is who I am and this is what I will not tolerate. Junior's hate list is his declaration of independence. It is his mission statement. It is his way of telling the world exactly what he believed in. When Junior named these 6 people on Club Shay Shay, he was not being petty. He was being honest. He was being authentic. He was showing the world that even legends have enemies. Even heroes have villains. Even the cleanest players in baseball history had people they could not stand. And that makes him more real, more human, more relatable. The beauty of Junior's story is that his enemies made him stronger. They did not break him. They built him. Steinbrenner and Martin created the fire that burned inside him every time he faced the Yankees. A-Rod showed him what happens when you choose money over integrity. Bonds and Sosa proved that cheating always catches up to you. Belle demonstrated that chaos loses to grace. Each villain taught Junior a lesson. Each enemy enemy reinforced his values. Each person on his hate list made him more determined to do things the right way. And in the end, Junior won. Not just on the field, but in life. He got his Hall of Fame plaque. He got his legacy. He got his respect. And he got it all without compromising who he was, without selling his soul, without sacrificing his values. He won by being himself, by staying true, by never blinking. That is the real lesson of Ken Griffey Jr.'s hate list. It is not about hating people. It is about loving something so much that you refuse to let anyone destroy it. Junior loved baseball. He loved integrity. He loved his family. He loved doing things the right way. And when people threatened those things, he remembered. He kept score. He made them pay. What makes Junior different from other players is that he never wavered. Other players talked about integrity but gave in to temptation. Other players said family mattered but chased money. Other players claimed to love the game but destroyed it with cheating. Junior was different. He lived his values every single day. He made hard choices and stuck with them. He faced pressure and never cracked. Think about the pressure he was under during the steroid era. Everyone around him was getting bigger. Everyone was hitting more home runs. Everyone was breaking records. And Junior could have joined them. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have caught him. But he said no, because it was wrong. Because it went against everything he believed in. Because his integrity meant more than any record. That is why his hate for Bonds and Sosa runs so deep. They had a choice. They could have stayed clean. They could have competed fairly. But they chose the easy way. They chose chemicals over character. And Junior had to watch them pass him in the record books. He had to watch them get praised while he stayed pure. That kind of pain creates lasting hate. The same goes for A-Rod. Junior showed him the right way. He mentored him. He taught him how to handle success. And A-Rod threw it all away for money. That kind of betrayal cuts deep. That kind of disloyalty creates permanent enemies. Junior gave A-Rod everything, and A-Rod chose greed. And the Yankees? They created the foundation for everything. They taught young Junior that the world could be cruel. They showed him that power corrupts. They demonstrated that institutions care more about control than people. And Junior never forgot those lessons. He carried them his entire career. Years from now, when people look back on the steroid era, Junior will stand out. He will be remembered as the one who stayed clean, the one who did it right, the one who never compromised. And these 6 names will be remembered as the ones who failed, the ones who sold out, the ones who destroyed what Junior fought to protect. That is Junior's ultimate victory, not the home runs, not the gold gloves, not even the Hall of Fame induction. His ultimate victory is that he gets to sleep at night knowing he never cheated anyone. He never lied. He never betrayed his values. He stayed true from beginning to end, and nobody can ever take that away from him. The hate list is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. It shows that Junior cared deeply about the right things. It shows that he held people accountable. It shows that he never forgot when someone violated his code. And in a world where everyone forgives and forgets, where scandals get swept under the rug, where cheaters get second chances, Junior's refusal to forgive is powerful. It is a statement that some things matter too much to forget. When kids today look at Junior's career, they see the smile. They see the backward hat. They see the incredible catches and the beautiful swing. But they should also see this. They should see a man who stood for something, a man who drew lines, a man who said no when everyone else said yes. That is what makes him a true legend. His hate for these 6 people is not a flaw. It is a feature. It is proof that he cared. It is proof that he paid attention. It is proof that when people did wrong, he remembered, and he made sure the world knew. That takes courage. That takes conviction. That takes character. In a sport full of scandal and compromise, Griffey never blinked. He held on to his values even when it cost him records, even when it cost him money, even when it cost him glory. He stayed true to himself, and that is why his legacy is untouchable. Nobody can take it away from him. Nobody can question it. Nobody can taint it with scandal or cheating or greed. These 6 names are not just people Junior hated. They are the people who defined what he loved. They are the villains in his story. And by standing against them, Junior became one of the few legends who never needed forgiveness. He has nothing to apologize for, nothing to explain, nothing to justify. His career speaks for itself. His integrity speaks for itself. His legacy speaks for itself. If you want more raw, honest stories like this, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Who do you think Griffey hated most? Reggie Jackson. Names 5 players he will never forgive. 5 men. 5 wounds that never healed. This is not about baseball rivalries or locker room drama. This is about racism, betrayal, and the price one man paid to become a legend. Reggie Jackson, Mr. October himself, carried a list in his heart for decades. A list of men who tried to break him. Men who used slurs, silence, and psychological warfare to remind him that no matter how many home runs he hit, he would never truly belong. And when he finally spoke their names, the sports world had to reckon with a truth it had spent years trying to bury. These 5 men shaped Jackson's career in ways no trophy ever could. They forced him to build armor out of arrogance, to turn insults into identity, and to survive in a system that valued his talent but despised his presence. This is the story of George Steinbrenner, Billy Martin, Thurman Munson, Greg Nettles, and Billy North. 5 names, 5 scars, and 1 man who refused to forget. George Steinbrenner was not just Reggie Jackson's boss. He was the architect of his misery. When Steinbrenner signed Jackson to the Yankees in 1977, he made him the highest-paid player in baseball. On paper, this looked like respect. In practice, it was something far darker. Steinbrenner operated with what Jackson later called a plantation mentality. He believed that buying Jackson's contract meant owning Jackson himself. Not just his swing, not just his time, but his dignity, his voice, his very sense of self. Steinbrenner thrived on chaos. He pitted Jackson against his manager, Billy Martin, and his teammates, knowing full well that racial tensions would erupt. He watched the Bronx Zoo burn and sold tickets to the fire. For Steinbrenner, conflict was not a problem to solve. It was a strategy, and Jackson was the kindling. The owner understood that controversy sold newspapers, filled seats, and kept the Yankees in the headlines. But he never considered the human cost of his manufactured drama. But the betrayal went deeper than manipulation. There was a moment when teenagers in a parking lot hurled racial slurs at Jackson. They screamed obscenities about his mother. They used language designed to provoke, to dehumanize, to reduce a grown man to a reaction. And when Jackson chased them down, the press framed him as the aggressor. The legal system treated him like a criminal. And Steinbrenner? Steinbrenner said nothing. He did not defend his star. He did not crusade for his dignity the way he might have for a white player like Thurman Munson. He let Jackson twist in the wind because, to Steinbrenner, Jackson was not a man. He was a commodity. And commodities do not require protection. They require performance. This silence spoke volumes about how Steinbrenner truly viewed his highest-paid employee. Protection was conditional, reserved only for those who fit a certain mold. Jackson has recalled moments when Steinbrenner's true beliefs slipped through the corporate veneer. Comments like, "All black people can do for me is shine my shoes and buy my records." Words that revealed a man who saw black excellence as entertainment, not equality. Steinbrenner made Jackson wealthy, but he also made him a prisoner of a contract that felt like chains, a prisoner of a system that rewarded his labor while resenting his agency. And that is why Jackson will never forgive him, because Steinbrenner proved that even when you are the best, even when you are the richest, even when you are the most famous, racism does not care. It just finds new ways to remind you that you are still not free. Steinbrenner wanted Jackson's brilliance on the field, but resented everything that made him brilliant off it. The owner treated Jackson like a piece in a chess game, moving him around to serve his own ego and ambitions. Now let's talk about Billy Martin. If Steinbrenner was the cold, calculating architect of Jackson's suffering, Billy Martin was the flame. He was rage personified, and he directed every ounce of that rage at Reggie Jackson. The core of Jackson's hatred for Martin is simple. Martin called him boy, not once, not accidentally, but repeatedly, deliberately. In the 1970s, in the shadow of the civil rights movement, that word carried the weight of centuries. It was the language of Jim Crow, the language used by white authority figures to strip black men of their manhood, their age, their accomplishments. Jackson's father had taught him a lesson he never forgot. You do not call a grown man boy. And yet here was Billy Martin, his manager, using that word like a weapon. For Jackson, it was not a slip of the tongue. It was a declaration of war. It was Martin saying, no matter how many World Series MVPs you win, you remain beneath me. Martin wielded that word with precision, knowing exactly how much pain it would inflict. The tension between the two men exploded at Fenway Park in 1977. Martin pulled Jackson from the game in the middle of an inning for an alleged lack of hustle on a fly ball. This was not normal. Superstars are not publicly humiliated like that, but Martin did it anyway, and when Jackson returned to the dugout, Martin lunged at him, screaming, veins bulging. Coaches had to restrain him. The whole scene was captured on national television. To the viewing public, it looked like chaos. To Jackson, it was an attempted lynching of character. Martin was trying to break him in front of the world. He was trying to physically subdue the uppity star who dared to demand respect. And Jackson knew that if he fought back, if he struck his white manager on live TV, his career would be over. So he stood there, silent, seething, surviving. The cameras captured Martin's rage but missed the calculated restraint Jackson showed. That restraint was its own form of strength, a refusal to give Martin the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. But Martin's bigotry was not limited to Jackson's race. He also made anti-Semitic remarks. Jackson, who has claimed Jewish roots or affinity, saw Martin's hatred as comprehensive. It was not just anti-black. It was anti-anything that was not white, compliant, and traditional. Martin believed in an all-American boy ideal, and when Jackson asked people to Google that phrase to search for black faces, he found none. Martin resented Jackson because Jackson represented the intrusion of blackness into the sacred imagery of the Yankee dynasty. DiMaggio, Mantle, Ruth. These were Martin's heroes, and Jackson in Martin's eyes was a stain on that legacy. That is the unforgivable part. Martin did not just insult Jackson, he tried to erase him. and Jackson refuses to let that erasure stand. Next is Thurman Munson, the captain, the heart and soul of the Yankees, the beloved blue-collar catcher who played through pain and led by example. Munson was supposed to be Jackson's teammate. Instead, he became his tormentor. The feud is famously tied to a quote Jackson gave to a magazine. "I'm the straw that stirs the drink. Maybe I should say me and Munson, but he can only stir it bad." Jackson claimed he was misquoted, but the damage was done. Munson felt betrayed, and the team turned on Jackson. But here's what most people miss. The root of the conflict was not pride, it was money. Munson had actually encouraged Steinbrenner to sign Jackson, hoping Jackson's high salary would raise the bar for everyone and allow Munson to demand a raise. But when Jackson got the money and the fame, and Munson was left to fight for scraps, Munson's anger was misdirected. He blamed Jackson instead of Steinbrenner. Munson saw Jackson as the problem when the real issue was an owner who refused to pay him what he deserved, and that anger became racialized. Munson represented the hard-working white player who got his uniform dirty. Jackson represented the flashy black star who drove a Rolls-Royce and did TV commercials. In the locker room, this translated into economic jealousy wrapped in racial resentment. Munson, as captain, set the tone. He refused to speak to Jackson. He gave the rest of the team permission to treat Jackson like a pariah. The silent treatment became a form of violence, and Jackson felt it every single day. The nickname Mr. October, the name that became Jackson's badge of honor, was actually coined by Munson, contemptuously, sarcastically. Munson meant it as a slur. He was mocking Jackson for caring about the big stage, for being arrogant, for being visible. Jackson, in a stroke of genius, reclaimed the insult and turned it into legend, but its origin was rooted in hostility. Now think about what message that sends. You walk into work every day. Your captain, the leader, refuses to acknowledge you. Your teammates follow his lead. The silence is suffocating. You are isolated, you are othered, and all because you dared to be great and get paid for it. Jackson wanted to be a Yankee. He wanted to be part of the brotherhood. Munson slammed the door in his face, and even after Munson's tragic death in a plane crash in 1979, even after narratives of reconciliation emerged, Jackson still carries the wound. Because Munson had the power to stop the hazing. He had the power to protect Jackson. Instead, he led the charge. And that is a betrayal Jackson will never forgive. The captain's silence gave everyone else permission to treat Jackson as an outsider in his own clubhouse. Then there is Graig Nettles, the all-star third baseman, the clubhouse jester, the man who used humor as a knife. If Martin was the angry father and Munson was the resentful brother, Nettles was the mocking cousin. He undermined Jackson through ridicule, and his racism was not loud or violent. It was casual, comfortable, insidious, the kind of racism that hides behind a smile and says, "I was just joking." But Jackson was not laughing. The most damning evidence against Nettles comes from a book written by teammate Sparky Lyle. In it, Lyle describes a moment when Nettles watched an opposing player, Wayne Cage, taking batting practice. Cage was a large black man. Nettles turned to a teammate and said, "I never saw a player with his address on his uniform." Let that sink in. That comment invokes the projects, poverty, the ghetto. It reduces a professional athlete to a racial caricature of a criminal or welfare recipient. And Nettles said it in the sanctity of the clubhouse, a space shared by black players. It was not a joke. It was a message that no matter how talented you are, no matter how successful, white teammates like Nettles will always see you as less than. Jackson understood this. He understood that Nettles viewed black people through a lens of inherent inferiority. Nettles also made comments designed to delegitimize Jackson's ability. He joked that Babe Ruth would not be able to bat cleanup today because he did not strike out enough. On the surface, it is about strikeouts. Below the surface, it is part of a campaign to portray Jackson's power as lucky and his strikeouts as evidence of a lack of discipline, a common racial trope. Nettles was also a key enforcer of the silent treatment. He ignored Jackson on the field. He refused to engage in camaraderie. For Jackson, Nettles represented the polite racism of the North, the racism that smiles to your face while ensuring you never feel welcome. And that is why Jackson will never forgive him, because Nettles tried to hide his bigotry behind humor. And Jackson refuses to accept the premise that those were just jokes. They were weapons, and they cut deep. Every laugh at his expense was a reminder that he would never be one of them, no matter how many games he won for the Yankees. Finally, there is Billy North, the Oakland A's speedster, the only black man on Jackson's unforgiven list. And that makes this story the most painful of all. North and Jackson were teammates during the A's dynasty years. They should have been. brothers, allies in a league that was overwhelmingly white and often hostile. But instead, they became enemies. In 1974, the two men got into a brutal clubhouse brawl. The fight was so violent that catcher Ray Fosse, trying to separate them, suffered a crushed disc in his neck, an injury that derailed his career. Jackson reportedly felt immense guilt over that, but the damage between him and North was done. What caused two black teammates to come to blows? The answer lies in lateral violence. The A's clubhouse was divided into cliques, often along racial lines, and Jackson refused to be confined to the black clique. He wanted to be a universal superstar. He wanted to court the favor of the white media and ownership. To some of his black teammates, this looked like betrayal. It looked like Jackson was trying too hard to be liked by everybody. In the charged atmosphere of the 1970s, that was a coded accusation. Billy North, a younger player fighting for his own recognition, resented Jackson's ego and his ability to transcend racial boundaries, and he viewed that transcendence as abandonment. North believed Jackson was choosing white acceptance over black solidarity, a choice that felt like a knife in the back. For Jackson, this was the deepest cut of all. In a league where he faced boy slurs from managers and plantation treatment from owners, the black teammate should have been a sanctuary, a safe harbor, but North became a physical enemy, and that represented a loss Jackson still mourns. The racism angle here is not that North was racist, it is that the environment of racism created a scarcity of dignity. It forced black players to fight each other for the scraps of respect left on the table. Jackson's inability to forgive North speaks to the heartbreak of this fracture. It was a reminder that the pressure of being a black star in a white league was so intense that it turned brother against brother, and Jackson refuses to let that pain be forgotten. So why does Reggie Jackson never forgive? Because to forgive would be to forget. And Jackson's memory is a survival mechanism. The unforgiven list is not an act of vengeance. It is an act of witnessing. Jackson is testifying to the reality of his experience. He is refusing to let the glory days nostalgia wash away the ugly truth of how he was treated. He is asserting that his home runs did not purchase his acceptance. They only purchased his tolerance. The Reggie persona, the arrogance, the third-person references, the swagger, was a suit of armor. He had to be arrogant to counter Steinbrenner's control. He had to be aggressive to counter Martin's abuse. He had to be loud to counter Munson's silence. He had to be serious to counter Nettles' jokes. He had to be singular to counter North's cliques. These five men are inextricably linked to Jackson. They are the antagonists in his hero's journey. But the racism angle reveals they were not just villains. They were enforcers of a social order that was crumbling. Jackson defeated them all. He outlasted Steinbrenner's threats. He outlived Martin and Munson. He outshined Nettles and North. But the victory came with a cost, a permanent sense of isolation, a ledger of scars that time could not heal. And yet Jackson survived. He rose above the plantation mentality. He reclaimed the boy slur by becoming Mr. October. He turned the straw that stirs the drink into a declaration of greatness. He survived the address joke and the Uncle Tom accusation. He built a legacy that no amount of hatred could erase. His 3 home runs in Game 6 of the 1977 World Series were not just athletic achievement. They were an answer to everyone who tried to diminish him. Today, Reggie Jackson is not defined by these 5 men, but he refuses to let the world forget them either, because their names are a map of the racism that existed in 1970s baseball, a map of the psychological warfare waged against black excellence, a map of the price one man paid to become a legend. And Jackson wants us to remember that while fans cheered for his home runs, many in the stadium and in his own dugout were rooting against his humanity. That is the unforgiven list. 5 names, 5 wounds, and 1 man who turned pain into power. Reggie Jackson will never forgive, and maybe he should not have to, because some things are unforgivable, and remembering them is the only way to ensure they never happen again. His refusal to forget is not bitterness. It is truth-telling. It is making sure history remembers not just the home runs, but the cost of hitting them. What do you think? Should Jackson have forgiven them? Or is his refusal to forget the only way to honor the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story opened your eyes to a side of baseball history you never knew, hit that subscribe button, because there are more untold stories waiting to be heard. Thanks for watching. George Foster names 5 players he will never forgive. People often remember Foster as a former MVP and a slugger who once terrified pitchers across the National League. But behind that reputation, teammates in 1986 were whispering something darker. He's a racist. Those 2 words exploded across the New York Mets clubhouse that August, tearing apart a championship team just weeks before their World Series run. Why would a former star destroy his own career with such inflammatory accusations? What happened inside that clubhouse that pushed his teammates to turn on him so completely? The answer reveals a man whose bitterness, declining skills, and refusal to accept reality created one of baseball's ugliest controversies. This is the story of George Foster in 1986, a cautionary tale about what happens when ego collides with failure, when a fading athlete refuses to look in the mirror, and when accusations of racism become a weapon to deflect from personal shortcomings. Understanding Foster's downfall requires examining how completely he had collapsed by that summer. This was not gradual decline. This was free fall. The same player who once terrorized National League pitching had become a liability his team desperately wanted to hide. The transformation was stunning in its speed and completeness. When the Mets acquired Foster in 1982, ownership specifically wanted him for PR credibility while their farm system developed. He was supposed to be the established star who brought legitimacy to a rebuilding franchise. For a few seasons, the strategy worked reasonably well. Foster provided veteran presence and occasional power. But by 1986, the players the farm system had developed, players like Strawberry and Gooden, had surpassed him completely. The young talent had arrived. Foster was now the expensive, aging placeholder blocking their progress. The front office found itself trapped. They had committed $2.8 million to Foster, making him the National League's highest-paid player. That enormous salary created expectations Foster could no longer meet. Every at-bat reminded fans and management how much money was being wasted. Every defensive mistake highlighted the poor return on investment. Foster had become a walking symbol of bad decision-making, and organizations hate nothing more than visible evidence of their failures. By August 1986, George Foster was drowning. The numbers told a brutal story. In July, he batted just 149 over 47 at-bats, with a slugging average of only .13. His power had vanished. His bat speed was gone. The man who once hit 52 home runs in a season for the Cincinnati Reds could barely make contact. August brought marginal improvement, but only to 189. For a player making $2.8 million as the National League's highest-paid player, this was catastrophic failure. But statistics only began to tell the story of Foster's collapse. Teammates watched him quit on plays. He refused to slide when running the bases. He would not cross the warning track in the outfield, standing still while balls dropped for hits. This was not age catching up to an athlete. This was deliberate, petulant refusal to compete. Foster had given up, but he expected everyone else to pretend otherwise. If you think Foster's behavior sounds bad already, stick around, because what he did next shocked even his harshest critics. And if you're enjoying this breakdown of one of baseball's most controversial moments, drop a comment below telling us what you think about Foster's actions. Manager Davey Johnson finally benched Foster on July 22nd, installing younger players Kevin Mitchell and Danny Heap in left field. The move was overdue. Foster's defensive laziness had become embarrassing. His offensive production had disappeared. Any rational manager would have made the same decision. Any professional player would have understood. But Foster was neither rational nor professional by this point in his career. Instead of accepting his diminished role, Foster began a campaign of passive-aggressive defiance. He showed up later and later for batting practice. One Monday at Wrigley Field, he arrived only minutes before practice began. This was calculated disrespect. This was a veteran player telling his manager and teammates that their rules did not apply to him. Wally Backman, the scrappy second baseman who embodied the Mets' blue-collar work ethic, watched Foster's behavior with disgust. Ron Darling, the starting pitcher, noticed Foster's failures in high-leverage situations. By early August, Foster was 0 for 8 as a pinch hitter. He could not deliver when the team needed him. He could not accept his reduced role. He could barely show up on time. The clubhouse began to turn against him. Teammates talked amongst themselves about Foster's attitude. They noticed his lack of effort. They resented his salary. They questioned his commitment. Foster was becoming isolated, cut off from the team he blamed for his failures. What Foster did not understand or refused to acknowledge was that he had brought this isolation entirely upon himself. His statistics justified his benching. His behavior justified his teammates' disdain. His attitude justified management's frustration. But Foster, consumed by ego and bitterness, could not see reality. He needed someone to blame. He needed a narrative that made him the victim rather than the failure. On August 5th, 1986, Foster found that narrative. He accused the New York Mets of racism. The quote was explosive. Foster told reporters that when a ball club can, they replace a George Foster or a Mookie Wilson with a more popular white player. He said the Mets would rather promote a Gary Carter or a Keith Hernandez to the fans rather than a Darryl Strawberry, a Dwight Gooden, or a George Foster. The accusation was clear. According to Foster, preferred white role models to black stars. The statement was strategically calculated. Foster knew exactly what he was doing. He was leveraging race to transform his personal failure into organizational injustice. He was attempting to redirect attention from his terrible statistics and worse behavior onto the Mets' supposed bias. He was weaponizing the experiences of genuinely talented black players like Strawberry and Gooden to give credibility to his own grievances. The tactic was as transparent as it was inflammatory. Foster had no evidence of organizational racism. He had abundant evidence of personal failure. His batting average proved he deserved benching. His defensive laziness proved he deserved criticism. His chronic lateness proved he deserved discipline. But instead of accepting responsibility, Foster chose to accuse his employers of racial prejudice. The reaction was immediate and furious. Manager Davey Johnson was not disappointed. He was not concerned. He was infuriated. Johnson had wanted Foster gone for a long time. The personal animosity between them was deep and mutual. Foster would later admit he had a burning desire to plant a fastball in Davey Johnson's ribcage. This was not a professional disagreement. This was personal hatred. The Mets granted Foster an outright release the next day, agreeing to eat the remaining $1.6 million on his contract. Think about that number. In 1986, $1.6 million was enormous money. Organizations do not throw away that kind of cash unless absolutely necessary. The Mets were willing to pay Foster to go away immediately rather than tolerate him for another 6 weeks until season's end. This financial decision reveals the true nature of Foster's release. It was not about baseball operations. Teams routinely tolerate underperforming, overpaid veterans to avoid financial penalties. The Mets' willingness to absorb $1.6 million proves Foster's comments about racism were viewed as existential threats to clubhouse stability and public image. The organization chose to pay dearly to remove him instantly. Days later, realizing the magnitude of his mistake, Foster held a press conference claiming his remarks were misinterpreted. He denied characterizing the Mets organization as racist. This backtracking was pathetic. The words were on record. The damage was done. Foster wanted the inflammatory impact of his accusation without accepting responsibility for making it. He wanted to play victim while denying he had attacked anyone. The retraction failed completely. The Mets had already decided. Foster was gone. His attempt to walk back his comments only highlighted his dishonesty. He had made a calculated accusation, watched it explode, then tried to pretend he meant something else. Nobody believed him. The clubhouse reaction revealed the deep fracture Foster had created. White teammates focused on performance and loyalty. Black teammates expressed complex feelings about vulnerability and organizational power. But one thing united almost everyone. Foster had crossed a line. He had buried his teammates. He had violated clubhouse codes. He had made everything about him when the team was chasing a championship. Wally Backman's response was brutal and unambiguous. He said Foster brought it on himself. You don't bury teammates and act the way he's acted the last few weeks. You don't come up with this racist stuff and call yourself a teammate. No teammate would respect that. Backman dismissed Foster's racial accusation as mere stuff, as nonsense designed to deflect from personal failure. For Backman, Foster's primary sin was disloyalty. The racism accusation was just another form of betrayal. Ron Darling offered cold statistical analysis. He expressed regret that Foster couldn't have been satisfied with getting a few key hits down the stretch, immediately citing Foster's earned 0 for 8 performance as a pinch hitter. Darling's response was clinical. The numbers justified everything. Foster failed, so Foster was benched. Foster complained, so Foster was released. Race had nothing to do with it. Performance explained everything. But the black players on the roster heard something different in Foster's accusations. Darryl Strawberry expressed disappointment not in Foster, but in the organization's timing. He said they could have waited until the end of the season. Then Strawberry added the most revealing comment of the entire controversy. It just shows you how the game is. It can happen to anyone. Who knows? I might be next. Strawberry's fear was real and justified. He was the Mets' most talented young player, a future superstar. Yet he worried the organization might discard him just as quickly as they had discarded Foster. This vulnerability reveals the complex reality black players faced in the 1980s. Talent did not guarantee security. Popularity did not guarantee loyalty. Stardom did not guarantee immunity from organizational capriciousness. But here's what Strawberry failed to recognize in that moment. Foster's release had nothing to do with race and everything to do with behavior. Foster quit on his team. He showed up late. He refused to compete. He blamed everyone else for his failures. Then he accused the organization of racism when they finally held him accountable. Strawberry's fear that he might be next was only valid if Strawberry planned to behave as unprofessionally as Foster had. Dwight Gooden defended Foster on personal grounds, saying Foster did a lot for him and was a great guy. Gooden said it was too bad it had to happen this way and that Foster could have helped in the playoffs. This response showed empathy but also naivety. Yes, Foster may have been personally kind to Gooden. Yes, Foster might have contributed something in October. But Foster's behavior had made his continued presence impossible. Gooden's sympathy, while genuine, ignored the reality of what Foster had done to himself. Mookie Wilson, the other black player Foster specifically named in his accusations, expressed ambivalence. Wilson said he wasn't sad but didn't have to like the situation. This careful response revealed Wilson's political awareness. He would not defend Foster's methods. He would not celebrate Foster's departure. He acknowledged the complexity without taking sides. Wilson understood that Foster's accusations were problematic, even if underlying tensions about race and image were real. What's remarkable about these teammate reactions is how little support Foster actually received. The young black players expressed sympathy for Foster's vulnerability and criticism of organizational timing, but none of them endorsed his racism accusation. Nobody said Foster was right. Nobody said the Mets actually preferred white players. Nobody validated Foster's central claim. This absence of support is damning. If Foster's accusations had merit, if the Mets truly favored white role models over black stars, Strawberry and Gooden would have confirmed it. They would have shared their own experiences of bias. They would have used Foster's public platform to amplify legitimate grievances. Instead, they carefully distanced themselves from Foster's specific claims while acknowledging their own professional uncertainty. Foster's accusation collapsed under examination. Gary Carter and Keith Hernandez were promoted as role models because they were established veterans with clean reputations. Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden were young stars still proving themselves. This was not racial preference. This was standard organizational strategy. Teams always build public relations campaigns around stable, reliable veterans rather than volatile young players, regardless of race. Furthermore, Foster's own behavior undermined his accusation. How could he claim the Mets discriminated against black players when his benching was so obviously justified by performance? How could he claim racial bias when his defensive laziness and chronic lateness were documented by teammates? How could he present himself as a victim when he had quit competing? The answer is that Foster was not actually concerned with organizational racism. He was concerned with George Foster. He weaponized race to fight a personal battle against a manager he hated and an organization that had stopped coddling him. He cynically invoked the real struggles of black athletes to explain away his own professional failures. This was not activism. This was exploitation. Foster's career effectively ended with his release. He signed with the Chicago White Sox about a week later. He hit a home run in his debut on August 15th, speaking ambitiously about reaching 400 career home runs. But he played his last major league game on September 6, 1986. Less than a month after joining the White Sox, Foster's career was over. He was done. The Mets, meanwhile, went on to win the World Series. They achieved their championship without Foster's contributions. They overcame the controversy he created. They proved that his presence had been expendable, that his accusations had been baseless, that his departure had been necessary. The 1986 Mets are remembered as one of baseball's great teams. Foster is remembered as a bitter footnote who tried to burn it all down on his way out, but Foster refused to let it go. Decades later, he remained consumed by resentment. The Mets invited him back for the closing ceremonies of Shea Stadium in 2008, an olive branch extended by the organization and interpreted as the franchise forgiving him. Foster rejected the invitation. He said he would never forgive the organization. He would never forgive Davey Johnson. He would never let go of his anger. This refusal to forgive reveals everything about Foster's character. The Mets were offering closure. They were offering reconciliation. They were offering Foster a chance to rejoin the family he had scorned. But Foster preferred his bitterness. He preferred his grievance. He preferred his role as victim. In subsequent interviews, Foster promoted an alternative explanation for his 1986 release. He claimed the real issue was the team's ongoing drug problems and his moral opposition to the clubhouse culture. He suggested his release was punishment for standing against the Mets' vices, for being the one clean player in a corrupt system. This narrative shift is revealing. Foster cycled through justifications, trying different stories to explain his departure, unable to settle on one truth. First, he accused the Mets of racism. Then he retracted and claimed misinterpretation. Then years later, he blamed drugs and personal hatred of Davey Johnson. Each narrative positioned Foster as righteous victim of institutional betrayal. None acknowledged his statistical collapse. None admitted his behavioral problems. None accepted his own responsibility. This pattern of blame shifting defines Foster's legacy. He never looked in the mirror. He never admitted fault. He never recognized that his release was entirely predictable and entirely deserved given his performance and conduct. Instead, he constructed elaborate theories of persecution, changing the details but always maintaining his own innocence. The drug narrative is particularly cynical. By claiming he opposed the Mets' drug culture, Foster attempted to recast himself as moral crusader rather than failed player. This explanation conveniently ignored his own failures while painting him as ethically superior to teammates. It allowed Foster to feel righteous about his exile rather than accepting that he earned it through poor play and worse behavior. Foster's burning desire to plant a fastball in Davey Johnson's ribcage, admitted years after retirement, reveals the depth of his personal animosity. This was not philosophical disagreement about playing time or team strategy. This was violent hatred. Foster fantasized about physically assaulting his manager. This toxic relationship guaranteed that any misstep by Foster would be met with maximum discipline from Johnson. When Foster finally gave Johnson the excuse he needed by accusing the organization of racism, Johnson seized it instantly. The manager was infuriated not because Foster's comments were true, but because they were politically explosive and personally insulting. Johnson had wanted Foster gone. Foster gave him justification. The release was swift and permanent. The $1.6 million the Mets paid to remove Foster immediately is the smoking gun that reveals organizational priorities. This was not a baseball decision. This was crisis management. The Mets determined that Foster's presence, specifically his public accusation of racism during a historic championship season, posed unacceptable risks to team cohesion and public image. They paid premium price to eliminate that risk overnight. Think about what the Mets prioritized. They valued clubhouse stability over $1.6 million. They valued Davey Johnson's authority over $1.6 million. They valued narrative control over $1.6 million. Foster's comments about race and role models threatened all three priorities. The organization made a calculated decision that removing Foster's political volatility was worth any financial cost. This decision had nothing to do with whether Foster's accusations were accurate. The Mets never investigated claims of racial bias in player promotion. They never examined whether their marketing favored white stars. They never considered whether Foster's critique contained truth. Instead, they immediately expelled the player who made the accusation public. From a pure power dynamics perspective, the Mets' response was logical. Organizations exist to protect organizational interests. Foster threatened those interests by creating political controversy during a championship run. The rational response was immediate removal regardless of accusation validity. The Mets chose short-term pain of financial loss over long-term pain of extended racial controversy. Foster interpreted this response as confirmation of his persecution. The speed and severity of his release proved to him that he had struck a nerve, that his accusations about racial preference were accurate enough to warrant extreme organizational reaction. But this interpretation reveals Foster's narcissism. The Mets' response proved they found Foster's presence intolerable, not that his accusations were true. They were removing a disruptive, failing employee who had created public relations crisis, not silencing a whistleblower. The 5 players Foster named in his controversial comments, Gary Carter, Keith Hernandez, Darryl Strawberry, Dwight Gooden, and Mookie Wilson, all continued their careers without the baggage Foster carried. Carter and Hernandez remained Mets stars. Strawberry and Gooden became franchise icons despite personal struggles. Wilson finished his career respected. None of them became defined by Foster's 1986 accusations the way Foster himself became permanently defined by them. This outcome is instructive. If Foster's claims about organizational racism were valid, if the Mets truly operated with racial bias in player promotion, the black players he named would have experienced similar conflicts. But Strawberry, Gooden, and Wilson all maintained productive relationships with the organization throughout their Mets careers. They faced challenges and controversies, but never were they expelled the way Foster was. Their experiences suggest Foster's unique circumstances were driven by Foster's unique behaviors rather than systemic racial bias. Foster's refusal to ever forgive the Mets is ultimately an act of self-imprisonment. He remains trapped in August 1986, replaying his grievances, nursing his resentments, unable to move forward. The organization moved on. His teammates moved on. Baseball moved on. Only Foster stayed frozen in place, clutching his anger like treasure. This refusal to forgive reveals Foster's need to maintain victim status. Forgiveness would require acknowledgement that perhaps the situation was complex, that perhaps his own behavior contributed to his release, that perhaps his accusations were overstated. Forgiveness would require growth and self-awareness. Foster chose stagnation and blame instead. The Mets' 2008 invitation represented genuine olive branch. Organizations rarely invite back players who accuse them of racism. The fact that the Mets extended this invitation 22 years later suggests they bore Foster no lasting ill will. They were offering reconciliation. They were offering closure. They were offering Foster a chance to be part of the 1986 championship celebration rather than remaining its bitter footnote. Foster's rejection of this invitation was petty and self-defeating. He chose permanent exile over temporary discomfort. He chose lifelong grievance over moment of grace. He chose to remain unforgiven rather than risk the vulnerability of reconciliation. This choice speaks to fundamental character flaws that likely contributed to his 1986 collapse in the first place. Throughout this entire saga, Foster displayed consistent inability to accept responsibility. When his statistics declined, he blamed the organization for not playing him. When teammates criticized his effort, he blamed their disloyalty. When management benched him, he blamed racial prejudice. When the organization released him, he blamed drugs and personal vendettas. Always external factors, never George Foster. This pattern of externalizing failure is why Foster's teammates turned against him so completely. Wally Backman's harsh condemnation reflected widespread clubhouse sentiment. Foster brought it on himself. He buried teammates. He acted unprofessionally. He played the race card. He violated every code of clubhouse loyalty. He earned his exile through choices he made and behaviors he displayed. Ron Darling's statistical dismissal reflected rational assessment of Foster's value. The numbers were indefensible. Foster could not hit. He could not deliver in pressure situations. He was 0 for 8 as a pinch hitter when he made his accusations. No amount of racial grievance could overcome the reality that Foster had become useless as a player. Darling's pragmatic response cut through Foster's political theatrics to focus on measurable failure. Even the sympathetic responses from Strawberry and Gooden contained implicit criticism of Foster's methods. Neither endorsed his racism accusations. Neither said he was right. They expressed sadness about the situation and fear for their own vulnerability, but they did not validate Foster's central claims. Their careful statements acknowledged complexity while maintaining distance from Foster's explosive tactics. Mookie Wilson's ambivalent response was perhaps most damning. Here was a player Foster explicitly named as potential victim of racial preference, yet Wilson refused to defend him. Wilson disliked the situation but would not mourn Foster's departure. This measured response suggested Wilson saw through Foster's self-serving narrative. Wilson recognized that while racial tensions might exist, Foster's specific accusations were problematic, and his behavior was indefensible. The complete absence of strong support from any teammate is the most important evidence against Foster's claims. If organizational racism was real and widespread, someone would have strongly backed him. Someone would have said Foster is right, and I've experienced it too. Someone would have used the moment to amplify legitimate complaints. Instead, teammates carefully distanced themselves while acknowledging general workplace complications. Foster's legacy is ultimately one of wasted potential and self-destruction. He was a genuine star in Cincinnati, a legitimate MVP, a feared slugger. He could have finished his career with dignity as a respected veteran. Instead, he quit competing, blamed everyone else, accused his employers of racism, and spent decades nursing grievances. He transformed himself from champion to cautionary tale. The 1986 Mets won the World Series without him. This fact haunts Foster's narrative. The team he claimed needed him, the organization he accused of injustice, they succeeded immediately after removing him. They proved his expendability. They validated management's decision. They demonstrated that Foster's presence had been burden rather than asset. If Foster had accepted his reduced role gracefully, he might have contributed to that championship. If he had maintained professional behavior, he might have been welcomed back for reunions and ceremonies. If he had acknowledged his own failures alongside any legitimate grievances, he might have found peace. Instead, he chose bitterness, accusation, and permanent exile. This choice defines George Foster more than any statistic or championship. He chose grievance over growth. He chose blame over accountability. He chose unforgiveness over reconciliation. He chose to be remembered as the bitter player who accused his team of racism rather than as the champion who helped build a dynasty. The irony is that Foster had legitimate complaints mixed with his self-serving narrative. Racial dynamics in 1980s baseball were real and complex. Media treatment of black athletes was often unfair and stereotypical. Organizational decision-making could reflect unconscious bias. These realities existed, but Foster undermined any legitimate critique by coupling it with transparent personal grievance, by making accusations when his own failures were so obvious, by using race as shield against accountability. Had Foster been performing well and still faced benching, his accusations would carry more weight. Had Foster maintained professional behavior and still faced organizational hostility, his claims would seem more credible. Had Foster supported his accusations with specific evidence beyond his own treatment, his critique might have sparked necessary conversations. Instead, he made explosive claims at the moment his own failures were undeniable, ensuring everyone would view his accusations as desperate deflection. This timing was catastrophic for Foster's credibility. Making racism accusations when you're batting 149 and showing up late to practice guarantees, people will dismiss your claims as excuse-making. Foster's legitimate frustrations about racial dynamics in baseball were permanently tainted by the circumstances of how and when he chose to voice them. He poisoned his own message through terrible timing and obvious self-interest. The competing narratives Foster has offered over the years, first racism, then drugs, then personal hatred of Davy Johnson, reveal his fundamental dishonesty. If Foster truly believed the Mets were racist, he would have maintained that accusation consistently. If he truly opposed drug culture, he would have led with that explanation. Instead, he cycled through justifications, trying different stories, unable to settle on coherent truth. This narrative instability suggests Foster himself does not know why he was really released, or more likely refuses to acknowledge the real reasons. He was released because he could not play anymore. All these factors combine to make his presence intolerable. But Foster cannot accept this multi-layered explanation because it requires acknowledging his own failures. So he cycles through external justifications, always maintaining his innocence, always blaming others. This psychological inability to self-reflect has trapped him in permanent bitterness, unable to move past August 1986. The title of this piece, George Foster Names 5 Players He Will Never Forgive, captures this bitter reality. Foster cannot forgive. He will not forgive. He has chosen unforgiveness as identity. The 5 players he named in his accusations, Carter, Hernandez, Strawberry, Gooden, Wilson, they all moved on with their lives and careers. Only Foster remained frozen, unable to let go, unable to grow. This refusal to forgive has cost Foster dearly. He was excluded from reunion celebrations. He missed opportunities to reconnect with teammates. He spent decades alone with his resentments. While his 1986 teammates enjoyed the ongoing glory of their championship, Foster nursed his wounds in isolation. He chose this path. He maintains this choice. He will never forgive, which means he will never be free. The ultimate tragedy is that Foster had opportunities for redemption. He could have accepted responsibility and moved forward. He could have acknowledged complexity and sought reconciliation. He could have forgiven and been forgiven. Instead, he chose permanent victim status, permanent grievance, permanent unforgiveness. Perhaps there's a lesson here about ego and accountability. Foster's ego prevented him from accepting his declining skills. His ego prevented him from embracing a reduced role. His ego prevented him from admitting fault. His ego destroyed his career and poisoned his legacy. If Foster had possessed humility to match his talent, his story might have ended very differently. But George Foster was not humble. He was proud, defensive, and ultimately self-destructive. He blamed everyone except himself. He accused others while refusing self-examination. He demanded forgiveness while offering none. He wanted respect he had not earned through recent performance. He expected loyalty he had not shown his teammates. The 5 players he named moved on because they understood what Foster did not. Professional sports require accepting reality. When performance declines, roles change. When behavior becomes problematic, consequences follow. When accusations prove unfounded, credibility suffers. These are simple truths Foster refused to accept. George Foster's 1986 controversy reveals more about Foster than about the Mets. It shows a man unable to accept aging, unable to embrace reduced role, unable to maintain professionalism, unable to accept accountability, and ultimately unable to forgive or move forward. His accusations of racism, whether cynical weapon or genuine belief, were undermined by timing, context, and his own failures. The Mets won without him. His teammates succeeded without him. Baseball continued without him. Only Foster remained trapped in that August moment, replaying his grievances, nursing his bitterness, refusing to let go. He will never forgive, which means he will never be free. That is George Foster's ultimate legacy, not as champion or MVP, but as the bitter man who could not let go, could not grow up, and could not forgive. Yet despite all this, Foster was once a great player, and the sad complexity of his story reminds us that even champions can fall, and that grace, when offered, should perhaps be accepted. His story, while frustrating, is ultimately human. What do you think about George Foster's refusal to forgive the Mets? Was he justified in his accusations, or was this a case of a failing player blaming everyone but himself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into one of baseball's most controversial moments compelling, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories from sports history.
Whole house come down. I looked around and what did I do to these people? I really did not. And then it kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And you know how that makes me feel. Those are like straight.
Dick Allen had a list of names. These were players he vowed he would never forgive. Not when they retired, not when they apologized, not ever. One of those names belonged to a man who swung a baseball bat at his head. Another belonged to a legend who destroyed the only happy team Allen ever knew. When Dick Allen died in December 2020, he took that list to his grave. Today, we're going to tell you exactly who was on it and why he could never let it go. Allen was one of the most talented hitters baseball has ever seen. He won Rookie of the Year in 1964. He dominated pitchers with raw power. He became the American League MVP in 1972. But his career was never about the numbers. It was about survival. It was about fighting back against a system that wanted to break him. And it was about remembering the men who tried to destroy him along the way. Before we dive into the names on his list, take a second to hit that subscribe button. We're building the best community for real sports history, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Dick Allen died on December 7th, 2020. He was 78 years old. The baseball world mourned him as a legend. Fans remembered his power. Historians praised his courage. But underneath all the tributes was an uncomfortable truth. Allen had spent his entire life refusing to forgive certain people. He never hid it. He never pretended everything was fine. In his autobiography, he laid it all out. The racism, the violence, the betrayals, and he made it clear that some wounds never heal. To understand why Allen held such deep grudges, you have to go back to 1963. That was the year everything changed for him. That was the year he learned that baseball didn't care about protecting him. It only cared about using him. In 1963, the Philadelphia Phillies moved their minor league team to Little Rock, Arkansas. Allen was just 20 years old. He was a rising star in their system, and he became the first black professional baseball player in the entire state of Arkansas. Think about that. Arkansas was the same place where, just 6 years earlier, the governor had called in the National Guard to stop black students from going to school. The same governor, Orval Faubus, threw out the first pitch on opening night. He stood on that field like everything was normal, like he wasn't the face of segregation. Allen walked onto the field that night and saw signs. One sign said, "Don't Negroize baseball." Another said, "Nigger go home." There were picketers marching outside the stadium. They weren't quiet about it. They wanted everyone to know that a black man didn't belong there. Allen later said he thought Jackie Robinson had integrated baseball 16 years earlier, but in Arkansas, it was like integration never happened. The Phillies organization told the local media to ignore Allen's race. They said it would stir things up, so nobody talked about it. Nobody wrote about the threats. Nobody acknowledged what was happening. Allen was completely alone. His white teammates lived together. They went out to eat together. They moved freely through the city. Allen couldn't do any of that. He stayed with a black family named the Hugheses at 21 South Chester Street. He was separated from his team every single night. There was no bonding, no friendship, just isolation. The terror was constant. Fans screamed slurs at him during games. They threw objects at him from the stands. One night, Allen made an error in left field. He admitted later that he froze because he was scared. He was terrified of what might happen if he messed up in front of that crowd. But then he hit 2 doubles and won the game. When he got back to his car, there was a note on his windshield. It said, "Don't come back again, nigger." The abuse in Little Rock wasn't just verbal. It was physical. Fans threw things at Allen while he played third base. The songwriter Chuck Brodsky later wrote a song called "Letters in the Dirt" about the abuse Allen suffered at that position. Objects came flying from the stands regularly. Racial slurs filled the air every single night, and Allen had nowhere to turn. His teammates couldn't understand what he was going through. They went back to their comfortable lives after each game. Allen went back to his segregated housing, knowing he could be attacked at any moment. Allen led the league in home runs that year. He hit 33. He led in RBIs with 97. He put up incredible numbers despite the terror, but the Phillies never protected him. They never stood up for him. They never said a word. They got his production and left him to face the hate alone. That experience taught Allen a lesson he would never forget. The baseball establishment saw him as a tool, not a person, a production unit, not a citizen, and that lesson shaped every conflict that came after. The Little Rock experience created a permanent distrust in Allen. He learned that white authority figures would sacrifice his safety for their convenience. He learned that organizations would use his talent while ignoring his humanity. He learned that being excellent at baseball didn't protect you from racism. It just made you a more valuable target. These lessons stayed with him when he reached the major leagues. They informed how he responded to disrespect. They explained why he refused to just smile and take it when teammates crossed the line. 2 years later, Allen was in the major leagues. He was a star. He had won Rookie of the Year in 1964 by putting up historic numbers. He led the league in runs. He led in total bases. His performance was undeniable, but his relationship with the Phillies was already poisoned, and it was about to get much worse. Because in 1965, he met Frank Thomas, and Frank Thomas would become the first name on his unforgivable list. Frank Thomas was a veteran player. He was white. He was popular with fans. fans, and he was fading. The Phillies brought him in to provide depth and experience. But Thomas had a problem. He liked to needle people. He liked to make jokes at the expense of younger players. And when those younger players were black or Latino, his jokes crossed a line. Thomas's needling wasn't innocent clubhouse banner. It was targeted harassment designed to enforce a racial hierarchy. He wanted younger black players to know their place. He wanted them to understand that no matter how talented they were, white veterans still held power in the clubhouse. Allen understood this dynamic immediately. He had lived through it in Little Rock. He knew exactly what Thomas was doing, and he wasn't going to tolerate it. On a West Coast road trip, Thomas walked up to Allen in front of the whole team. He looked at him and said, "Hey boy, can you carry my bags to the lobby?" It wasn't a joke. It was a power move. Thomas was treating Allen like a servant, like a porter. He was trying to humiliate the best player on the team by reminding him of his place. Allen didn't laugh. He didn't play along. He told Thomas that kind of talk didn't fly with him, but Thomas didn't stop. He started calling Allen Richie X. It was a mocking reference to Malcolm X. He called him Muhammad Clay, mixing up Muhammad Ali's chosen name with his birth name as an insult. These weren't innocent nicknames. They were attacks on black identity. They were designed to put Allen in his place, and they worked on creating tension in the clubhouse. Thomas knew exactly what he was doing. By invoking Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, he was attacking Allen for having pride in his black identity. This was the mid-1960s. The civil rights movement was at its peak. Black athletes were starting to speak out, and Thomas wanted to punish Allen for being part of that cultural shift. Every time he called Allen Richie X, he was saying that black pride was something to mock. Every time he used Muhammad Clay, he was rejecting a black man's right to choose his own name. These insults carried enormous weight, and Allen felt every ounce of it. The breaking point came on July 1st, 1965. The night before, Thomas had failed to execute a bunt. He struck out awkwardly. During batting practice the next day, Johnny Callison started heckling him. Callison was a star outfielder. He shouted at Thomas, "24 hours too late, Lurch." It was a reference to the character from the Addams Family. The other players laughed. Allen laughed too, but Thomas couldn't handle being mocked by another white player, so he turned his anger on someone safer, someone he thought he could bully without consequences. Thomas pointed at Allen and yelled, "What are you trying to be, another Muhammad Clay, always running your mouth off?" Allen hadn't said anything. Callison had done the heckling, but Thomas blamed Allen anyway. It was a racial double standard. White players like Callison could joke around, but black players like Allen were supposed to stay silent. They were supposed to take the abuse and keep their mouths shut. Thomas was enforcing that rule, and he was doing it in front of the entire team to send a message. Allen refused to accept that. He confronted Thomas near the batting cage. He told him, "Frank, I told you that stuff don't go with me." Then he punched him. Thomas went down. In that moment, Allen was defending more than just himself. He was defending every black player who had been told to shut up and take it. He was drawing a line that Thomas had crossed one too many times. What happened next was unforgivable. Thomas got up and grabbed a baseball bat. He swung it at Allen's head. The bat hit Allen in the shoulder. It caused serious injury. Johnny Callison said years later, "Thomas got himself fired when he swung that bat at Richie. In baseball, you don't swing a bat at another player. Ever. This wasn't a fair fight. This was assault with a weapon, and it could have killed him." Think about what that means. Frank Thomas tried to murder Dick Allen with a baseball bat? That's not an exaggeration. A bat swung at someone's head is a deadly weapon. If that bat had connected with Allen's skull instead of his shoulder, Allen could have died right there on the field. Thomas was willing to kill a teammate rather than accept being punched for his racism. That's how deep the hatred ran. That's how much Thomas believed he had the right to treat Allen however he wanted. The Phillies released Thomas immediately, but they didn't tell the public what really happened. They ordered Allen not to talk to the press. They threatened him with a heavy fine if he said anything. So the fans never heard about Thomas calling Allen boy. They never heard about the racial slurs. They never heard about the bat. All they saw was that a black player had gotten into a fight with a beloved white veteran, and the veteran was gone. The white Philadelphia fans assumed Allen was the bad guy. They assumed he had forced Thomas off the team for no reason, and they made Allen pay for it. The cover-up was deliberate. The Phillies management knew the truth. They knew Thomas had been harassing Allen with racist slurs. They knew Thomas had swung a bat at Allen's head, but they chose to protect their own reputation instead of telling the truth. They chose to sacrifice Allen's relationship with the fans rather than admit they had allowed a racist player to assault their best hitter. This betrayal cut deeper than Thomas's bat ever could. Allen had been assaulted, and his own organization made him the villain. For the next several years, fans threw batteries at Allen in left field. They threw bolts. They threw coins. They threw fruit. The abuse was so bad that Allen started wearing a batting helmet while playing defense. Think about that image. A player so hated by his own fans that he had to protect his head in the outfield. That helmet became a symbol of the war between Allen and Philadelphia. A war that started because Frank Thomas swung a bat at him and the Phillies covered it up. The helmet in left field became iconic, but it was also tragic. It represented complete alienation. Allen should have been celebrated in Philadelphia. He was putting up MVP caliber numbers year after year, but instead he had to fear for his physical safety in his own stadium. The fans didn't know they were attacking a victim. They thought they were punishing a troublemaker, and the Phillies let them believe that lie because the truth would have made the organization look bad. Allen never forgave Thomas, not because of the punch, not even because of the bat, but because Thomas's racism combined with the organization's silence destroyed Allen's life in Philadelphia. He became the villain in a story where he was the victim, and that lie followed him for the rest of his career. Johnny Callison also carries some blame here. Callison wasn't a racist like Thomas. Allen actually respected his talent. He later mentioned that Tony Taylor was his favorite teammate, but he had respect for Callison's abilities as a player. But Callison was the one who started the heckling that day. His joke about Lurch triggered Thomas, and when Thomas redirected his anger at Allen, Callison didn't step in. He didn't tell the truth to the media. He let Allen take the fall. That moment reshaped Allen's entire relationship with the city. And while Callison wasn't on the same level as Thomas, his role as the instigator mattered. He set events in motion and then disappeared, leaving Allen to face the consequences alone. There was also Johnny Briggs. Briggs was another black player on the Phillies. Before Thomas turned his anger on Allen, he had been insulting Briggs with the same racist slurs. Allen stepped in to defend his teammate. That's how the whole thing escalated. So when you think about the Frank Thomas incident, remember this. Allen wasn't even defending himself at first. He was defending another black player from racial abuse, and he got punished for it. This detail is crucial. Allen could have stayed silent when Thomas attacked Briggs. He could have let Thomas abuse another black player without getting involved. But Allen had experienced that isolation in Little Rock. He knew what it felt like to face racism alone. So when he saw Thomas going after Briggs, he stepped in. He put himself in the line of fire to protect a teammate, and baseball's response was to gag him, blame him, and let fans attack him for years. That's the real story of the Frank Thomas fight. Allen was a hero who got treated like a villain. After the Thomas fight, Allen's life in Philadelphia became unbearable. He was fined constantly. He was suspended. The media called him a troublemaker, but what Allen was really doing was protesting. He was fighting back against a system that treated him like property. In 1969, he missed a doubleheader to go to a horse race. The manager suspended him for 26 days. Allen lost over $11,000 in salary. That was an enormous amount of money in 1969. The team was trying to break him financially. They were trying to force him into submission through economic punishment. Allen was also fined $1,000 for arriving late to a game. Again, this was a punitive amount designed to hurt him. But Allen didn't care about the money anymore. He was trying to force a trade. He was using truancy as a negotiating tactic. He was deliberately violating team rules to make himself so difficult that the Phillies would have no choice but to trade him. And eventually it worked. The Phillies traded him to the St. Louis Cardinals in a deal that also involved Curt Flood. That trade sparked Flood's historic challenge to the reserve clause. Allen's rebellion was part of a bigger movement. Players were waking up to the fact that they didn't have to accept being owned. Allen's rebellions in the late 1960s and early 1970s are often cited as proof of his bad character, but they were actually labor protests. He was fighting against the reserve clause system that gave teams complete control over players. He was fighting for his right to have some say in where he played and how he was treated. His truancy was a form of civil disobedience, and like all civil disobedience, it came with a cost. Allen paid that cost willingly because his dignity mattered more than his paycheck. The fines and suspensions Allen faced were part of a larger pattern. Baseball wanted to control every aspect of player behavior. They wanted players to show up on time, say the right things, and never complain. For white players, this system was restrictive. For black players like Allen, it was suffocating. They were expected to be grateful for the opportunity to play. They were expected to tolerate racism from fans and teammates alike. And when they pushed back, they were labeled as troublemakers. Allen refused to play that game. He refused to be grateful for abuse. In 1972, Dick Allen finally found peace. He was traded to the Chicago White Sox. The manager was Chuck Tanner. Tanner gave Allen freedom. He let him be himself. He didn't try to control every aspect of Allen's life. He didn't punish Allen for being different, and Allen responded with the best season of his career. He won the American League MVP in a landslide. He led the league in home runs with 37. He led in RBIs with 113. He led in walks with 99. His OPS plus was 199. The Southside Hitmen era was born. For the first time in his career, Allen felt embraced. He felt respected. The White Sox were his sanctuary. This is important. Allen's 1972 season proved that he wasn't the problem. When given a supportive environment, when given a manager who respected him, when given teammates who accepted him, Allen thrived. He put up one of the greatest offensive seasons in baseball history. He carried a mediocre team to relevance. The White Sox became exciting again because of Allen. All the talk about him being a clubhouse cancer was proven false. The cancer wasn't Allen. The cancer was racism. But that sanctuary was destroyed in 1974, and the man who destroyed it was Ron Santo. Ron Santo was a Chicago Cubs legend. He was a star third baseman. He spent 14 years with the Cubs and became a beloved figure on the North Side. In the winter of 1973, the Cubs tried to trade him to the California Angels. Santo didn't want to go. He used the 10-5 rule to block the trade. That rule gave players with 10 years of service and 5 years with the same team the power to veto any trade. Santo forced the Cubs to trade him to the White Sox instead. He wanted to stay in Chicago, and he didn't care that he was walking into someone else's team. Santo's decision to force his way to the White Sox was selfish. He could have gone to California and started fresh with a new team, but he wanted to stay in Chicago because of his personal convenience. He wanted to remain a Chicago institution, and he was willing to disrupt a winning team to make that happen. He didn't ask Allen how he felt about it. He didn't ask the White Sox players if they wanted him. He just forced his way in using the power of his contract. Allen saw Santo's arrival as an intrusion. Santo entered the White Sox clubhouse with the attitude of a man who believed he deserved to be in charge. Allen wrote in his autobiography, biography, Santo thought himself a Chicago institution. He thought he should be the team leader automatically, but you don't get to be a team leader through longevity. Santo had all our guys screwed up. The problem was simple. Allen was the undisputed leader of the White Sox. He had carried that team to relevance. He had won the MVP. He had created a culture of winning. He led by example through his performance and his quiet intensity. Santo came in and tried to take over. He tried to assert vocal leadership immediately. He thought his years with the Cubs entitled him to run the White Sox clubhouse. But leadership isn't about talking. It's about performance. And Santo's presence fractured the clubhouse. Santo's leadership style clashed with Allen's. Allen led quietly. He showed up. He performed. He commanded respect through excellence. Santo was loud. He was vocal. He tried to lead through force of personality. The younger players didn't know who to follow. Some gravitated towards Santo because he was more visible. Others stayed loyal to Allen because he had been there first. Factions formed. The chemistry that had made the 1972 team special was gone. Arguments broke out. Trust eroded. The White Sox clubhouse became a war zone. The chemistry was destroyed, and the results showed on the field. The White Sox finished the 1974 season with an 80-80 record. It was a disaster. The year before, they had been competitive. Now they were mediocre. And Allen blamed Santo for all of it. He blamed Santo for disrupting what had been working. He blamed Santo for dividing the team, and he was right to blame him. Santo's behavior represented something bigger to Allen. It represented the arrogance of the white establishment. Santo believed his status with the Cubs gave him the right to walk into another team and take over. He believed his longevity mattered more than Allen's leadership. He believed being a Chicago institution meant he could go wherever he wanted and do whatever he wanted. And Allen couldn't forgive that. Santo had ruined the one place where Allen felt safe, the one team where he felt respected, and he did it because he thought being a Chicago institution gave him that right. The hype around the 1974 White Sox had been enormous. People expected a super team. They expected Allen and Santo to combine their talents and dominate the league. Instead, they got dysfunction. Sports writers blamed both players equally. But the truth was simpler. Santo came into Allen's house and tried to redecorate. He disrupted a functional system because he thought he knew better. And when the system collapsed, everyone acted surprised. While Santo was destroying the team's chemistry, another conflict was brewing. This one involved a pitcher named Bob Reynolds. Reynolds was part of the faction that clashed with Allen's way of doing things. During the 1974 season, Allen and Reynolds got into a physical fight in the clubhouse. The details are murky. Some reports call it an argument. Others confirm it was a physical altercation. But what matters is this. For the second time in his career, Allen found himself fighting a teammate in the locker room. The camaraderie of 1972 was completely dead. The sanctuary of the White Sox clubhouse had been breached, and Allen was done. The fight with Reynolds was significant because it showed how far things had fallen. In 1972, there was harmony. Everyone got along. Everyone pulled in the same direction. By 1974, there was physical violence in the clubhouse. Players were fighting each other. The team that Allen had helped build was collapsing, and Reynolds represented that collapse. He was a symptom of the disease that Santo had brought with him. On September 14th, 1974, Allen left the team. There were 2 weeks left in the season. He was leading the league in home runs. He was leading in slugging percentage. He was still performing at an elite level, but he walked away. He forfeited his salary. He refused to play for a team he felt had lost its way. The White Sox traded his rights to the Atlanta Braves. Allen refused to report. He wouldn't play in the Deep South. The trauma of Little Rock was still too fresh. The thought of going back to that region was unbearable. He was disillusioned with the whole system, so he retired, and the fight with Reynolds was the final straw that pushed him over the edge. Allen's decision to walk away at the peak of his powers showed how deep his pain ran. He was still one of the best players in baseball. He could have kept playing for years. He could have chased records. He could have made millions more dollars. But none of that mattered. His mental health mattered more. His dignity mattered more. He would rather quit than endure another day in a toxic environment. That decision took courage, and it showed that Allen valued his humanity over his career. The conflicts with Santo and Reynolds weren't just personal disputes. They were the culmination of everything Allen had been fighting against his entire career. The racism, the entitlement, the disrespect, the refusal of white authority figures to acknowledge his leadership. Allen had finally found peace in Chicago, and two men destroyed it. He never forgave them for that. The media loved to call Dick Allen a troublemaker. They called him a clubhouse cancer. Bill James, the father of baseball statistics, wrote that Allen did more to keep his teams from winning than anybody else. That characterization was heavily influenced by the narratives around the Thomas and Sosa conflicts. It painted Allen as the problem. But look at the numbers. In 1964, before the Frank Thomas fight, Allen won Rookie of the Year. His OPS plus was 162. He led the league in performance. In 1965, after the fight, his OPS plus was still 146. He was still elite, but fans were throwing batteries at him. In 1972, before Sano arrived, Allen won the MVP. His OPS plus was 199. He led the league. The White Sox had a resurgence. In 1974, with Santo and Reynolds creating chaos, Allen's OPS plus was still 153. He was still leading the league, but he quit the team in September because he blamed Sano for ruining everything. The friction wasn't caused by Allen's performance. It was caused by his refusal to accept abuse. He kept producing at an elite level even while fighting wars on multiple fronts. fronts. But the media blamed him anyway. They said he was the reason his teams didn't win, and that reputation delayed his Hall of Fame induction for decades. The voters looked at his statistics and saw a Hall of Famer, but then they looked at his reputation and hesitated. They believed the narrative that Allen was difficult. They believed he hurt his teams, and they punished him for it by keeping him out of Cooperstown. The Hall of Fame delay was painful for Allen. He watched lesser players get inducted while he waited. He watched players with worse statistics and shorter careers get their plaques, and he knew why he was being passed over. It wasn't about his numbers, it was about the fact that he had refused to be quiet. He had refused to forgive. He had refused to pretend that everything was fine, and baseball punished him for that honesty. Dick Allen's refusal to forgive certain people wasn't about being petty. It was about survival. In the context of baseball history, forgiveness is often a tool used to silence marginalized voices. Black players were expected to forgive the racism of fans. They were expected to forgive the insults of teammates. They were expected to forgive the cowardice of management, all in the name of team unity. But Dick Allen rejected that script. He refused to forgive Frank Thomas because Thomas represented the violent enforcement of white supremacy in the clubhouse. He refused to forgive Ron Santo because Santo represented the entitlement of the establishment to co-opt spaces built by others. He refused to forgive the media and management because they created a double standard that labeled him a villain while protecting his aggressors. By holding on to these grievances, Allen insisted on the validity of his own experience. He was saying, "I was the victim, not the villain," and he refused to let anyone rewrite that story. His death in 2020 came during a national reckoning on race. It allowed for a final reevaluation of his legacy. People started to see him not as an unforgiving malcontent, but as a prophet of player rights and human dignity, a man who simply refused to be broken. Frank Thomas, Ron Santo, Bob Reynolds, and Johnny Callison. Those are the names on Dick Allen's list. They represent different types of betrayal. Thomas was the violent racist who tried to kill him with a bat. Santo was the entitled intruder who destroyed his sanctuary. Reynolds was the final breaking point that drove him to walk away. And Callison was the instigator who set events in motion and then let Allen take the fall. Together, they map out the racial and labor tensions that defined baseball during the civil rights era, and Allen's refusal to absolve them was his final act of autonomy. When Allen walked away from baseball, he didn't do it because he couldn't play anymore. He did it because he couldn't tolerate the disrespect anymore. He had spent his entire career being told to shut up and play, being told to accept abuse in the name of the game, being told that his talent didn't give him the right to demand dignity. And eventually he said no. He drew a line, and he never crossed back over it. Dick Allen was finally inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2020. It came decades too late, but it came. And when it did, people finally started to understand what he had been fighting for all along. Not just the right to play baseball, but the right to be treated like a human being, the right to say no to racism, the right to demand respect, the right to hold people accountable for their actions. Dick Allen's list of unforgivable names wasn't a sign of bitterness. It was a statement of principle. And that principle was simple. Some things cannot be forgiven. Some wounds cannot heal. And some people will never deserve absolution. Allen's story reminds us that forgiveness is not always the right answer. Sometimes holding on to anger is an act of self-preservation. Sometimes refusing to forgive is the only way to maintain your dignity. Allen understood this better than anyone. He lived through experiences that would have broken most people. And instead of breaking, he set boundaries. He said, "These are the people who hurt me. These are the people who betrayed me. And I will never forget what they did." Which player on Dick Allen's unforgivable list shocked you the most? Was it Frank Thomas swinging a bat at his head? Was it Ron Santo destroying the only team where Allen felt at home? Or was it the way the whole system turned him into a villain when he was really the victim? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if you want more deep dives into the dark side of sports history, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started.